Welcome to another United States history lecture. This time our topic is the Great Awakening, the second Great Awakening. So let's all get woke together as we look at target 3.03. Throughout American history, religion has played a very important role in Americans' lives. When we looked at the colonial period, we noticed that many people came to America from Europe in search of religious freedom for themselves, not necessarily for others. We looked at the fact that religious debates influenced public policies, and it's going to be the same for the Jacksonian period of the 1820s and 30s, when Americans will break out in a series of revivals. These revivals in the southern part of the United States, they begin earlier, so closer to 1800. But in the northern part of the United States, they're more towards the end of the period, around 1830 into the 1840s. The first thing that we need to define for ourselves is what the heck is a revival and who are these people that are reviving? First of all, they're Protestants, which means that they're not Catholics. They do not follow Catholicism. So Protestants come in flavors like Presbyterian, Baptist, Methodist, Lutheran, for example. So they're of the Christian religious tradition, but they're not Catholic in their origin. So keep that in mind. The second thing to keep in mind is the term revival. If you didn't grow up in this Protestant Christian tradition like I did, it's sort of like strange to think about what a revival is. For lots of Protestant Christians, revival is a special time in the church year that could be any time in the church year that you decide it's going to be time for revival, or you feel like God is speaking to you about revival. And what happens at these events is a very deep call for renewing people's faith, for recommitting your life and your life's work to the church and to God, and for reaffirming just what you believe about your religious background. So these revivals are very important for lots of folks in terms of religion. They still go on today. They are still a very important part of a lot of Protestant Christian events and life in the church calendar. But if you've never experienced one, just hold on to your seats because we're going to talk about what it's like to get revived. The reason for this revival is not just that it's a periodic thing that happens in the church calendar, because you can have revivals every year and they not really do anything. Um, you can talk about getting revived and recommitting your life to Christianity, but it doesn't really result in any major changes. But in the 1820s and 30s, these revivals had a major impact on American life and culture. And we note they're really strong in the North. We also note they're very strong in areas where there's industrialization and urbanization, particularly when that industrialization and urbanization was rapid and it created a lot of fast-paced change. So the more your city grew, the more factories grew. Religion is offering a way for people to cope with these changes. Churches are saying, is your life feeling out of control? Are things out of whack for you? Don't worry, the church has an answer. So we see a lot of these revival movements really taking off in many northern urban areas. They would often call people to public gatherings. Many times the gatherings would be large and require you to be outside. So this is an example here of what's called a tent revival, because people have traveled from far away and they're staying for days or weeks at a time to experience religion. Now, I don't want to leave you with the impression that it's all religion and just church and all that sort of stuff. These events were also social events. And so, you've got people talking about their faith and thinking about God in their lives. But as you can see from the picture here, some people really aren't listening to this guy up here. He's, preaching and talking and making his point till he's blue in the face. And it seems only the people right here in the front are really into what's going on. I think if you look closely too at the picture, you'll notice something else that's very characteristic of these revivals. See if you spot it. Yes, very much the presence of women is dominating the center of this image. And we will note an increasing number of women involved in the revivals, involved in church, involved in spreading the ideas of the church to their community, and trying to help fix and reform their communities. So that will have a very big impact on something we'll talk about in a couple of days when we come back to the issue of women and their role in society. So I wanted to illustrate for you just how close the connection is between revivals and cities and industrialization and rapid economic change. This is a map of upstate New York showing places where the Mormon church takes off. More on the Mormons later. The purple dots are the Millerites, a group of people who followed a preacher who claimed to know when the world would be coming to an end. The Fourierists in black are a utopian group. Red are anti-slavery churches, but then the green dots are revival centers that are happening in 1831. And if I put on the map where the Erie Canal is located, you can notice that there's quite a close connection between the two. It's not a perfect one-to-one match. Nothing in history ever is. But it certainly suggests that economic changes are leaving people hungry for something to help them cope. This area of New York was so revived and visited by preachers with revivals that got a nickname, the Burned Over District. You might be thinking, burned? What does burning have to do with revival? Well, one of the most common beliefs in Christianity is that revival is like a fire, that God breathes new life and you are set aflame for God. So God visited these folks so much in 1831 they got burnt. And new churches were formed. People were committing to religion. And we'll talk more about later all these other things that pop up as a result. So let's imagine for a moment, it's 1830, you're at a revival, you got your tent set up, you're listening to the preacher who's telling you to recommit your life to God or commit your life to God in the first place because you never have. What are you going to experience? For one thing, you're going to experience a message of people having the power within them to reach for the grace of God, of having the ability to say, I need God's grace in my life, and I am going to reach for it rather than just wait for God to fix me. I'm going to do something on my own power. I can change my life because it's my choice. So these revivals do have an emphasis on people having the power within them to look for God's grace. A second belief that you see in many of these revivals is an emphasis on perfection. And I know we look at the word perfect and we have a sort of meaning associated with it that it means absolutely without flaw or blemish or mistake. But really, the word perfect in Latin means just thoroughly completed, completed all the way through. And for a lot of Christians, the idea of perfection is, is the idea that God is working through you and helping you achieve your fullest, most powerful self, your most fulfilled self on earth. It doesn't mean that you won't make any mistakes, but you can live in this grace that you've asked for, and you can make your life better, and you can make the world around you better. You can perfect yourself. You can also do this by getting out of your own head. Religion for many of these revivalists is a matter of the heart. What do you feel? What do you think in your heart? What is your heart saying to you? A lot of the preachers said that the religion that was being practiced in that day and time was merely intellectual. People were thinking their religion, but they weren't living it, they weren't feeling it. So a lot of these revivals were very emotional events. People danced and they cried out and they got the shakes and fell to the ground in just this very deep emotional religious ecstasy. It's almost like, in some ways, being in a mosh pit. This sense of connection with everything around you, and you feel like God is speaking to you, and you're feeling everything, and you just give into the excitement and the joy that's happening around you. And then finally, when this is all done and the revival tents are packed up, you're not finished. You must work together with other believers to clean up society because Christ is coming back. Christ is going to return to earth, and people need to get ready. They need to prepare. They need to clean up the world, and they need to work together to do this. So these are the kinds of things that you're going to hear at these revivals, trying to get people to see that they can achieve and grow and become better human beings and make their world a better place. A lot of what's going on at this time is also focused on the idea that Christ will be returning soon, and therefore people need to prep for that. And some of the revivalists took advantage of those ideas. One, William Miller, said that he had calculated exactly when this was going to happen. And these cartoons are making fun of the Millerite movement because Miller announced exactly when the day was going to be, and everybody's waiting and thinking, oh my God, it's going to happen today, and Christ is going to come, and the world is going to come to an end. And then it didn't happen. Miller, embarrassed, said, oops, I made a mistake. The calculations were wrong. So he went back to the drawing board and announced a second date. And people got excited again. Oh gosh, it's coming. It's going to happen this time. And then it didn't. So some people stuck with Miller, and the descendants of his group today are the Seventh-day Adventists. A lot of people just said, you know, you can fool me once, even fool me twice, but I'm done with you at this point. I'm moving on to the next best thing. So let's talk about where these messages of perfection and fixing yourself and society go. They are such powerful messages that they help inspire a number of social reforms in the United States. Very many Americans look at this message of perfection and they say, what can I do to fix the world around me. So we get a movement for Sunday schools for young folks, um, which becomes very common to train and educate young people. There's a strong emphasis on missionary work, so that Christians are told to go into the world and tell people about God and about Christianity so that they can get right and get perfect and fix their world. So there's a heavy emphasis on going around and telling folks. There is a set of reformers who say that the number one problem in America really is drinking. We need to get people to stop drinking. So there's a rise in temperance because Americans are drinking too much. Actually, it's about 5.2 gallons per person per year in 1830 is what they're doing. So their livers are pretty much pickled. Some others are saying, Christ is inspiring me to do charity work for the poor. We've got to get out there and help the poor and the downtrodden get out of those situations. We've got to help kids who are in those situations. So many of these reformers are inspired by the religious revivals to go and make their world a better place. Here is one of my favorite illustrations of temperance. It's called The Drunkard's Progress, because there was a great fear that Americans were wasting their lives away in alcohol. And if you were, committed to alcohol, you can't, there's not room in your life for God. You're full of the wrong kind of spirit, not the Holy Spirit for sure. So you need to be impressed with the idea of just how much danger you're in, you know. So this is an illustration of the slippery slope fallacy. It says, this guy starts out with a little bit of a drink in the morning, a little dram, a little drop. He's got his wife and his 3 kids there. Pretty soon, he's just spending all his time at the grog shop or the bar. Look, guy's puking right here. People are like passed out. People are fighting. And of course, the bar owner doesn't care. He's just making money off everybody's misery. Then daddy comes home, and what happens? Daddy is drunk and mean, and he hits people. In one of these illustrations, they show the father throwing his child into a fireplace because, that's supposed to scare you into not drinking anymore. And then what happens in the end? The family loses everything. They get evicted from their home and they're in poverty. So when daddy drinks, it ruins the entire family. So what do they need? They need Jesus. And they need to go to revival and get right with God. That has been this lecture on religious reforms in the Second Great Awakening.